Greenland has 10% of the world's freshwater resources, and Canada has an additional 20. And the UN today declared that the global freshwater bankruptcy era has begun, where we've run out. So today we're going to talk about the water wars on my series, Actually What's Happening, where we get away from breaking news and we talk about big global trends and topics. I'm not saying that like the global water shortage is the main thing that's like impacting all of geopolitics right now, but I'm not saying that. And today the UN did release a report that said we're in global bankruptcy, and they're like saying basically like we've been saying there was a water shortage, and like that's a thing where we're pulling out more than we should, and we should probably be careful about that and watch that. And then later they were like, well, we're having a lot of water crises, which is like a one-time major event from a drought or whatever, and we should try to get back to normal. And now they're saying there's no going back to normal, we're in trouble, we need to make major changes. And they're like all these crazy things that are in this report that you should read. And they show this chart about water conflict on the rise that I think is like really important for all of us to watch, because look at how that is like going up so fast. And I started thinking like, who has the most freshwater resources in the world now? Probably. And you start looking around and you see that, wow, Canada has 20% of the freshwater resources globally. And 7% of those are renewable freshwater resources, which is a lot for the number of people that live there. And then you look and you see that Greenland has 20% of the freshwater resources globally, if you count glaciers. And you start to wonder, maybe that's why these crazy pictures are being posted and why my country is acting insane, or at least it's a contributing factor, right? And when you start looking at how water impacts everyday life and especially politics places, you start to see things like this headline from The Guardian that shows that in Iran, there's been a major water shortage for several years. And they reached day zero back in December, where like basically like they're out of water, right? And that's happened because of many years of damming and overusing their aquifers and like mismanagement of water that's happened across many regimes. But the impact is that like that water is being used for things like irrigation for crops, and also people have to like drink that water, and it's used for like a lot of purposes, and that increases the prices of a lot of things. And many people are now saying that that is a major contributing factor to the protests that are happening in Iran, because they're running out of clean drinking water. And scientists in South Korea just put out a report that showed that those day zero events that have happened in a few places around the world, South Africa and Mexico City we've talked about recently, could happen in 3/4 of drought-prone areas on Earth before the end of the century. And I think it's important to remember that the Earth is mostly water, right? And like less than 1% of global fresh water, which is like a percent of all the water on Earth, is in like surface waters, which is like lakes and rivers and stuff like that. But we use, now stick with me here, it's a small percentage of all the water on Earth, but those like surface waters, like rivers and lakes and stuff like that, we use that for about 50% of what we use for fresh water around the world now. And so it's really important what happens to rivers and lakes and watershed and stuff like that. And this month I wanted to learn a little bit more about that, so I read this book, Is a River Alive?, which was like very informative. I don't know if it was my favorite book, but he, like this author, goes and visits 3 important rivers around the world and then looks at how countries have like tried to preserve those rivers from different things. And I didn't know that Ecuador is one of the leading countries in the world that has put in place rights around nature and around rivers specifically. And it has helped them produce and preserve river rights in their country. And in November, Ecuador turned down a referendum to rewrite their constitution, which would have taken away some of those rights from nature, basically. It was put forward by their very hot head of state, who I don't agree with politically, but like gotta give game where it's. And I think we can learn a lot from the way that Ecuador has set this up, because what they're allowing for is for nature to be able to like maintain its basic rights. In order to stand up in court and make it so that like preservation sites can continue to be preserved. And that is one big step on the journey, I think, to allowing us to get past this like bankruptcy. And other countries have followed suit. There have been major lawsuits in India and Bolivia and elsewhere that have kind of like helped continue to move this legal framework forward, which should protect these types of places. And the other place that I thought was interesting in this book that's profiled is in Chennai in India, where there are major rivers. And of course, India has like a really solid like historic and cultural connection to rivers. The river Ganges, of course, is very important. And I've been to India a bunch of times to different states, but haven't seen the whole country. But I thought I was drawn to like this story that I saw on CNN a couple months ago about a guy who's going through and trying to like restore a bunch of natural rivers and lakes across India. And part of what he's doing now is he's also restoring their ancient stepwell system, which is like a very cool architectural feature that you've seen probably if you've ever been to India, that's kind of like sunken into the ground, and it collects groundwater and rainwater and filters it naturally through the sediment to create like these freshwater basins within urban environments. And I think like that's a really cool way of trying to connect the past to the present and all the way hopefully to the future. And so like while geopolitically I think there's an undercurrent of water coming all the way through to like some of the major diplomatic tensions that we're facing today as a world, I think also at the same time, a lot of regular people are trying to step up and find ways for our world to move forward in a peaceful way, in a way that really honors the traditions of where we are. This river book was a recommendation from somebody in my comments, so please let me know if you see anything else that I should be checking out.